Hello, welcome back to Elli, and today this is part of 2026. We don't want to date this, but I just wanted to let you know that Elli, as we're moving forward, is doing a lot of exciting things, especially as it relates to new training, new education. And part of that is going to be in what we're going to talk about today, which is our standards and guides. It's important in our industry that we act as professionals and that we are able to conduct ourselves accordingly for those situations. Let's say you're working for a landscape architect, an interior designer, a lighting designer, whatever it may be. You have to conduct yourselves accordingly outside of what you would normally do with a normal consumer, a residential consumer, let's say. So there's a different set of practices and expectations that are addressed at a professional level. So part of that includes these standards and guides. So what we're doing with Elli is we have produced a whole series or a grouping of different documents, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But these will be available for price, and you can utilize these in your current working situation. If you're a full-time landscape lighting designer and you need to look more professional, then you should have these documents available to you so that you can incorporate them into your work. If you're an installer, you may not need to incorporate these documents so much for work practices like giving them to the customer, but you will need to know what you should be doing performance-wise and what the expectations are at a professional level. So anyways, we've provided these. These are going to be a great asset for your own business, and we hope that you use them. All right, let's go to our first slide here, which is what will be discussed today. So we're going to look at the importance of education. We kind of just talked about that. The documents that are available, there's 3 categories that I mentioned. So we have specifications, we have guides and standard practices, or guidelines and standard practices, and then we also have general information. So we're going to have those 3 categories that we're going to work with, and all of these documents, these guides, these specs, they're all going to be available through the Elli website. That's how to acquire these documents. So you'll go to the website, you go to our educational gallery section or page, and all the way to the bottom you'll see guides and standards that's listed there. You click on that, and then you can basically, it'll link you to how to acquire the document itself. All right, so our next slide is the importance of education. Now this may make it's basic common sense, but let's look at it and break it down. So if you look at education as knowledge, then knowledge, basically, if you build your knowledge, you're building confidence and understanding, okay? And then on top of that, what are the results from having knowledge or education? It's basically you're developing yourself so that you become relevant and you become more of an authority figure, okay? Expertise. And then with results of that, then now you can expect to get paid better or higher wages. So that's the kind of the sequence of why education is important. Yes, it's common sense, but looking at that, this is why you should consider these documents, these standards, as part of your tools to get better. All right, let's move to our next slide. The documents that are currently available. There's going to be more that are added throughout the year, but let's start with guides and standards. And you can see on the slide there, the first one is products and materials. So guide to products and materials for landscape lighting. Everything's related to landscape lighting, obviously, whether it's a design element or it's an installation element or a maintenance or service element. It doesn't matter. These are guidelines that will work within those constraints. And it's going to be, this document's going to help you with selecting materials and understanding quality, the quality aspects of products and materials. Okay, the next document is a guide to as-built and documentation. This is the end of the installation phase when you give something to your customer or the consumer as a benefit. It's not a required thing, but it's an optional thing, and as a professional, you should do this because it's only going to enhance your services and your relevance within the industry. Okay, the next one is the guide to design critique for landscape lighting. This is something, it's more informational, and it's something that will help you to understand how to determine what good design really is. And we have a whole separate class on this that talks about composition and the elements and principles of composition. And this is how you can better, define what good design is. So that's another document. And then the last two in the guides and standards at this point in time are the standard practices for landscape lighting designers and also landscape lighting installers. And this, we're going to look at how to measure expectations, performance, experience, and then what the common practices are for those. All right, let's go to our next slide. So this is the next two document types that are available. So we just talked about the guides and standard practices. Now we move on to specifications. And then also we have general information. So specifications, we have trade specifications, and then we have a bid package specifications. And the difference between those, let's start with trade specifications. They're detailed in the sense of it relates to the equipment and the installation of the lighting systems, so that will define all the elements that are associated with that, including codes and expectations, basically, what's right and wrong. And then bid package specifications relate more toward, there's specifications also, but they're related towards hiring an installer and what the control elements are there, as well as the expectations. So those are heavily detailed documents, almost 30 pages each. And this will give you a really good understanding of what's going on, and also what is another part of including on a plan set. So remember, we talked about, as designers specifically, when you're working in offices and you have to have a working set of drawings, you'll typically have, whether it's a conceptual plan or an actual scaled drawing, which is part of the working document set, you have to include specifications in there. And this is a form of contractual control. It's an element of the contract or the agreement. So they have to be identified there so that you have some sort of legal control. Should something happen, whether it's good or bad, more or less bad, this way it controls those things and who's responsible for what. Okay, and then the last one, as I mentioned, was number 3, is the general information. So we have general notes, which is also included on plan sets. And these are just basic notes, but they're a form of control for the contract. And then the common flaws of landscape lighting. So we had a separate class that we produced called the Common Flaws of Landscape Lighting. And they all pertain basically to composition, and it's defined pretty well there. But this is a separate document that just lists that out for ease, so that you don't have to have an actual presentation to watch or whatever. All right, let's go on. Next page. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go through the next following slides and show you like examples of each one of these documents that we're providing. So the first one let's go over is the trade specifications. So specifications, what are specifications? They're requirements for materials, systems, and services. And they can be in 4 different areas here as part of this set. The first one being general specifications and authority bodies. Like, for example, authority body is who governs our industry, and the NFPA, the National Fire Protection Agency, they have the overwhelming control over pretty much anything that has to do with safety towards electrical and or fires, things of that sort. So the NEC is under their jurisdiction, which is the National Electric Code. So those are the 2 big biggies that are basically controlling everything that we do and how we do it. Number 2, materials and equipment. So we should have a description and specifications that are related to the types of materials that we're using and how the equipment's to be installed, etc. And that's the next one, number 3, installation procedures. Those should be listed in there. And then the last one is the maintenance services. What should be provided in maintenance services or future services? For repairs, for basic cleaning services, custom services, anything like that. All right, let's go to our next one. So here's an example of the trade specifications. I just took a snapshot of part of one of the pages that's in there so that you can see the kind of detail that's in here. It's not just a random, my thoughts here and there. I've taken my experience and others that have been doing this for 20, 30 years, and I put them into notes. As you can see here, it says like D1, material selection. So I put some of my notes in there at the beginning, and then I get into more of the details of the specifics, like the NEC codes. Utilizes Article 411 to describe low voltage lighting. That's Article 411 inside the NEC. And then you can see the individual updates that are listed in there. Now, let me talk about the NEC. The NEC is updated every 3 years. So what happens is when they update these, so for example, the last and latest update was in 2023, and now they're getting ready to update it this year in 2026. However, those new updates won't be implemented probably for the next year or 3 years before people start utilizing them and making them part of their practice. So that's why you have to go back to older NEC codes, and I've used the 2023 codes. Those are the most current being used, and it's important to know those because they've changed. Like I've said, we've always had a problem in landscape lighting, specifically when it comes to how close can you have a lighting fixture to the edge of a pool or a water source, okay? And it's always been 10 feet or more to be able to put fixtures next to a pool. So many of you have seen that's not the case. You go out and you look at landscape lighting jobs and you've got fixtures popped in within a couple feet of the edge of the pool. Well, that's not to code, or it wasn't before. Well, now it is under certain situations or certain requirements, and that's listed in here. So these are the important updates you should have so that you know legally what you're able to do and not do. This is why you should know specifications. All right, let's go to our next one. So the next one's the bid package specifications. More or less the same general thing as trade specifications, but this is more for specifying how to compare bidding contractors. What happens typically, if you're not a designer and installer, like a design build operation, and you're being hired by a consumer, let's say you're working for a landscape architect. Well, typically on the more professional side of things, they put out to bid the selection of hiring the installer for the job, unless they have a in-house guy that they always use. But let's say the landscape architect is working with you, you're the designer, you design the job, and then it has to be put out to bid. Who is going to get to do the installation work? So you have to have a bid package, it's called, to basically outline everything to be done on the job per the requirements of the designer and the owner. So that's what this is. So components of a bid package, you're going to have scope of work, inclusions and exclusions, and then also expectations of the contractor. You're going to have control and coordination of the project. Who is responsible and in charge of what aspect of the job? Scheduling and payments. You know, how does that occur? When does it occur? Who gets paid? And, you know, who's making the payments? Okay. And then incentives and penalties. Those need to be listed in there if they are part of the contract. For example, let's say, what happens if you are late on the schedule? You don't meet the deadline that you signed the contract on. Are there going to be penalties for that the owner can take advantage of, where you have to basically forfeit some of your money that you're supposed to be making because you didn't meet the deadline? That needs to be specified. Same with incentives. What happens if you finish in advance of the deadline? Do you get an incentive? Sometimes on these commercial jobs and bigger projects, they have those types of things. Okay, and then lastly, there's the bid package due date. If, let's say, you're giving out, 10 different bids, packages to different contractors, you have to have a due date of when those need to be received back by, or they're canceled from being able to do the job. And then lastly, you've got the part of this package, you're going to get a conceptual plan or a working drawing set that's provided by the designer, so that you can refer to that visually. And then also the terms for understanding, like what are the terms that are included in all this bid package, so that you understand what they're saying. Okay, so there's another document that's important that you should have, at least for knowledge and understanding. Next document. Let's go to the next page. This one includes two different documents that we provide that are addressing standard practices for performance. And one's going to be related to landscape lighting designers. Another one's going to be related to landscape lighting installers. They're more or less the same document, although there are variations in them. A lot of the content is the same, but like I said, it's specifically designed for each type of practitioner. So you're going to have in there terms and defining elements that define the practice. You're going to have criteria for selection that the consumer or the project owner can use. How should they select the right contractor or the correct or the right designer for the job? You're going to have expectations and performance measures. Those should be established in there. And then you're going to have compensation. What is the average compensation that people should be gaining for landscape lighting? This is a touchy subject because most are going off of today's environment where, charge as much as you can. There's guys out there teaching how to double and triple your pricing no matter what without having any qualifications or background and experience. That's not right. That's wrong, in my opinion. So this gives you a fair and balanced approach towards what compensation should be for this type of work. And it's nothing that's mandatory and a requirement, but it gives you a good, fair way of looking at it. So that's why that's in there. And then we also have what are the common working parameters for each of the job types. All right. The next document, actually, before I go there, here's an example of one of the pages or part of the page in the installation document. So here it talks about practitioners, you can see on the page here. And then what does it require for practitioner experience? How many years do you have to be start, like if you're brand new, then you're considered a novice or a beginner. And then you can see on my chart here, less than 2 years in business and less than 75 jobs installed. That's the basic criteria or parameter for being a beginner or a novice, as well as you can see for advanced and so on. So this is just part of this document. It's a good source and it's a good thing for you to consider and think about on how you treat yourself. All right, now moving on to the next document, which is general notes. Okay, this is another element that's needed for conceptual plans or working documents, more so the more professional side of it. You won't see this, well, you'll see this a little bit on conceptual plans. You may have general notes that the designer has included for the homeowner. So anyways, it includes general requirements, the division of work, and then materials and equipment that are being used. So let's go to the next page, which is an example of that. Here's just a snapshot again of part of the general requirements. So you can see here it's just basically a listing in more technical sense, and it is usually provided somewhere on the plan set or in plan documents that you're giving to the project owner. All right, let's go to our next document. We've only got a couple left. As-built plans and documentation. So what this is, it's the owner, well, the purpose of it, it's the owner and designer's final documents that you either prepare or you're giving to the owner as a final completion set. So once you finish doing the the installation on the job, then you need to give the owner something at the end of the job. Again, it's not required, but if you're a professional service provider, then you should provide these to them, okay? This includes things like the as-built plan. If you have plan work that's being done, let's say you did a conceptual plan for the job, then you take that and you update it with the necessary items for the plan, and you give a copy of that to the homeowner. Also, warranty information, which talks about product warranties and workmanship warranties, okay? What does the installer, what are they responsible for and how long? Typically, it's a 1-year workmanship warranty, but some may have it longer, 3 years, 5 years, whatever it is. But that all needs to be listed and identified so that the homeowner knows what they purchased and how they can take advantage of it if they need to. Another item in there is contact information. And this is the contact information for service providers, your designer, your installer, your service maintenance guy, if you have somebody selected to do that work. So all of that contact information should be in there. Again, it's a nice means to provide peace of mind to the consumer, to the owner of the project, so that they don't have to worry about what happens if something goes wrong or if I need something cleaned or repaired. You need to have that information for them. Okay, and then there's also future services. What are the services that you are offering or the service provider doing maintenance is offering in his future services package? Okay, this can be in the form of a service maintenance agreement where you actually give them a contract on this, or it can be more random, free-flowing, where you're just saying, hey, look, these are the services we'll do. I'll contact you a year out from the install, and we'll do a basic cleaning services, and we'll repair anything at that time. You have to have that type of stuff listed. And then as well as that, service costs. How do you define your costs based on the type of work you're doing? So if it's just a basic cleaning service and those types of things, then you maybe charge X amount. And if maybe it's an emergency call or a repair. Oh, we had lightning and it blew out 3 fixtures. I need to have those, changed out. So you're going to have different rates based on the types of service being done. So that all needs to be provided to them. That's part of this final as-built and documentation package. So again, these are great tools to have for you so you don't have to think about it and waste a lot of time. Now you've got a document you can refer to and you can modify it to what you need for your company. All right, so here on the next slide is an example of part of that as-built and documentation package. So you can just see on this page here, this is in the warranty section. So we talk about workmanship warranty, express warranties, implied warranties, and then there's some examples of implied warranties that should be used in your contract or on that for that information. Excuse me. All right, let's go to our next slide. Products and materials. This document, the purpose of it is how to identify quality in products and the types of materials that are being used. Is it brass, copper, aluminum, whatever it is. We talk about that in this so that you understand the differences so that you can make a qualified assessment of what you want to use for your brand, for your image, and for your customer. And then on quality, how long will it last? That's the longevity of the product. How strong and durable is the product? And then the last part is performance. How does it perform as compared to other products? These things need to be recognized, or you should have an understanding of that. So on product types, we're going to look and discuss in this document transformers, fixtures, light sources, cables, connections, hubs, and then control devices as well that are all part of the equipment that's used typically for landscape lighting. And then lastly in here we have a little discussion that talks about manufacturers, the importance of selecting a good and quality manufacturer and some of the problems that you may run into there. But again, another nice document that can be used for your company to help you. All right, let's go to the next slide, which is how to acquire these documents. As I mentioned before, visit our website. I've got the website link listed there that goes directly to where these are located inside the educational gallery. And then you just click on that document title, and then it'll provide a link and take you to the source to where you can have these printed on demand or downloads, things like that. So you select the document, and it will ship to you, and then you just basically pay for the publication. All right, pretty easy, pretty simple. Next slide. Pretty much wrapping up at this point. Again, why do you need these documents? Let's reiterate that as our final note. Again, education is knowledge. Knowledge is power. Okay, so if you want to become relevant and professional and be able to charge higher prices, then you need to be that authority within your marketplace. Okay, no better way to do that than having information available to you that you know. Okay, that's the benefit of what we're doing with Elli. We're providing these added detailed pieces, whereas a lot of the other entities that are out there that are assigned to landscape lighting are not doing so much of this. Okay, they may have some information, but we want to be a full rounded entity that's going to be able to provide to both designers and to installers and make your practices better. So that's our closing note for today. I hope that you sign up and purchase some of these documents. They'll be available by February, this next month, because we're working out getting them loaded at this time. They're all developed. It's just they have to be loaded, and then we determine package pricing and things like that. So thank you for your time, and we look forward to the next series with you.